James, before we get into playoff games from last night and some NFL schedule stuff that has come out today, I saw some response to our conversation about Brandon Ingram yesterday.
Okay.
And you had laid out a trade where it was a 3-team deal where the Kings are giving up Harrison Barnes, Davion Mitchell, and
Chris Duarte.
Their 2024 first-round pick would go to Atlanta.
Which they already owe Atlanta a pick anyways.
Right, so they would be picking up their 2025 pick, basically.
Yeah.
It would be they would be ridding themselves of the Kevin Huerter trade.
Yes.
It would be done this year. Then they'd give up their 2027,
2026, and 2028.
26 and 28, right? Not 27 and 29. 26 and 28. So they're giving up those picks to acquire Brandon Ingram.
Yeah.
In a 3-team deal.
Where Trae Young would go to the Pelicans. The Pelicans would give up a first.
Yeah. So one of the responses I saw, and again, this is a small sample size on the internet, but I know that there are some people who probably have the same thought process. So I kind of want to walk through it here at the top of the show and just continue our discussion from yesterday. So I one of the responses I saw was, well, there's no way the Hawks would do that. Like, well, they might. If they decide they're going to blow it up this offseason, that's a really good deal for them.
Yeah,
they're getting a bunch of picks.
Because in this deal, we're talking about the equivalent of like 3.5 picks, first-round picks.
Yeah, right. And so, and again, there's another, was it 2025 first from New Orleans?
Yeah, that's what we had.
Yeah,
2025. I to be honest, I haven't even made sure New Orleans has their 2025.
Sure,
something like that.
A first from New Orleans.
A first from New Orleans.
Sure. Anyways, there's definitely a realm where that's a possibility. But I saw some people, and you were responding to I think one person on online last night, who basically said, "Well, I'm not doing 3 first-round picks for Brandon Ingram." And my question is, because that was kind of my knee-jerk reaction as well. When you first sent that to me, you said, "Who says no?" And I was like, "Well, for me, it's the Kings," because that was just kind of I'm not a big believer in Brandon Ingram.
Okay,
but it's partly because there's an inherent risk there, A, with his injury stuff, B, with what he's going to give you on a night in, night out basis. Like, can he be that go-to guy on a team that wants to contend for a championship? I have questions about that. But on the other hand, if you're hoarding these picks, okay, if the draft picks mean that much, which again, if you're good, they don't. And if you're projecting out like the Kings are by 2028, you're still going to be in the mix. Still should be pretty good.
Yeah, that pick should be in the 20s.
Ideally, right.
Yes.
So maybe even 30. But that's kind of ideally where things fall. If you're not trading for Brandon Ingram, if you're saying those picks are off limits when it comes to Brandon Ingram, then who are they there for, realistically? And that's kind of the question that I have, because if it's go or get off the pot for the Kings at this point, for me. Like, you can't, if you're sitting there going, we're going to hang on to our picks, and Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter and Davion Mitchell and Chris, these are all assets that we're going to hang on to until like the exact right, perfect move. If you're working in a window that is this big, if you're not watching, my hands are very close together. If you're working in a window that big, then it's never going to come for you.
No, I totally agree. I mean, you're at a point where it's all in time.
You have to do something.
Well, you don't have to do something to do something. You have to do something because you're not good enough.
Yes,
exactly. I mean, that's like, it's a harsh reality, but that's the key.
Mm-hmm.
It's that you're not good enough. That finishing at 46 and whatever they finish at, 46 and 36, whatever it was, that's not good enough. It wasn't good enough to get you into the playoffs. 2 more wins, 5 more wins, you're safe. You're dancing,
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't good enough. So how do you reload? How do you get back to where you were last season? But you just lost a year. So now you got to not only take that, but you need to do more. You need to take the next step, which is to go from a solid playoff team to a playoff contender,
mm-hmm.
and like to a contender. And like, there's not a lot of ways to do that. And there also aren't a lot of players that are just going to be available, Kyle. And that's why when a player like this, that is good like this, that's averaged well over 20 a game for many years of his career, who was a one-time All-Star and could get back to an All-Star status, who's only 26 years old,
mm-hmm.
who you likely could lock up to a long-term deal if the money works.
Mm-hmm.
These players don't just like come around every day. It's nope. He also plays for the team that punked you 6 times this year. So for those of you out there like,
6.
Brandon Ingram isn't very good. Well, he played on a team that ran you over 6 times.
Mhm.
And does he have some warts? Yeah, every NBA player does so.
That's it. That is exactly it. And the players who don't aren't going to be available.
Yeah.
Because their teams are going to keep them. Like the Pelicans want to move on from Brandon Ingram because of those warts. They believe that they are maxed out with their roster the way it is, and they want to move on from him to try and acquire a different superstar.
Well, that and on top of that, they also have a young player who's developed behind him and is ready to take that job that they won't have to pay as much money.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
you're to a point where you have to make a move with Brandon Ingram, and it's not because you want to just get rid of him. It's because your team isn't good enough if you're the Pelicans as well, and you need to make some move that helps you. And just because he looks one way on the Pelicans, he could look totally different on the Kings. And that's what everyone needs to like realize, that there's a possibility that he is a perfect fit. There's also a possibility he doesn't fit at all, and you're like, this was not great, but at least we have a 26, 27-year-old under contract now that we can go trade to somebody else if we need to.
And that's where that is the crux of all of this. If they, let's just, again, we're going to go to the hypothetical world where this is the deal that they make for Brandon Ingram. If they make that move and it doesn't work, that is so much easier for me anyway. I to deal with and to accept than, oh well, the perfect move wasn't there. Mikal Bridges is the player that we had as the perfect guy, and we just couldn't swing a deal for him, so we're gonna run it back.
Yeah,
dude, that would be not. That's that. I would so much rather take a swing on Brandon Ingram. Even though, again, I'm not even like a Brandon Ingram guy. I had problems with him going into the play-in game against the Kings. We talked about it. I was like, I'm not scared of Brandon Ingram going and giving you 30. He's just he doesn't do that consistently enough. But I would so much rather take a swing on a player like that. This isn't some 31-year-old. This isn't a guy in his mid-30s who's looking to get one last max contract who might give you 50 games, and then he's a question mark if he's going to be available in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like there's been availability problems for sure, but I'm taking that risk over. I would so much rather go get Brandon Ingram than Jimmy Butler or Paul George at this point. I know. In fact, you know what? D'Lo and Casey asked you this yesterday, and I was listening in my car, and I was pulling into my garage, and they asked you this, and I waited for you to answer, but then you brought up that the Chatty House during their show is sponsored by Matthews Mattress, and then they started launching into a mattress thing, and I had to go to the bathroom, so I had to go inside. I left my phone. That's why I didn't turn it on the Odyssey app. So I didn't get your answer. Paul George or Brandon Ingram?
Well, I think it would have to be Brandon Ingram at this point.
I agree with you.
I mean, you're looking
like
at a
Paul
player.
George, but
I love Paul George, and like Paul George is an excellent scorer. He's still a really good defender. Like he checks all the boxes, but the problem is he's 33 going on 34, and he wants $50 million a year.
Yep.
And you're going to have a really tough time getting value out of that contract. I would much rather take a risk with a younger player who was a former All-Star who hasn't reached the heights, but that might find something very similar to what De'Aaron Fox found. It's that when you play with Domantas Sabonis, you all of a sudden are a lot more open. You have a lot more freedom to move around, and you can be a lot more impactful.
Yeah.
Because he's a guy who you run the entire offense through like they do with Zion, except for he is a willing passer and looking for the pass more than he is for the shot, where Zion is the opposite. And man, I think he could be really, really good in Sacramento. And he's on a short list. Like there's a short list of players. People talk about, Mikal Bridges all the time. Like, look, when they traded for Mikal Bridges, somebody offered them 5 first-round picks for Mikal that day, and they said no. And they're still saying no to 3, 4 first-round picks from teams. So, when you're talking about this deal that we brought up, it's really only 2 first-round picks because you already owe them the other pick.
Yeah.
That's it.
You're giving them a pick either this year or next year.
Either this year, next year, or the year after. And if it's not next year, it's because you didn't make the playoffs again, and then all hell breaks loose here in Sacramento.
Yeah. So we'll talk about who that perfect player is coming up. I And that's kind of where the next step of this discussion is. But for me, you're projecting this team to be good. The picks don't matter at that point. You have to make a move. You have to go get a player who's going to improve your roster, and regardless of what you think about Brandon Ingram, he would certainly improve their roster. But we'll keep talking about that and trying to define what the perfect player is for the Kings. And okay, if you don't want to go get Brandon Ingram, who would you be happy go getting realistically? It can't be Jason Tatum. It's not. That's not really. It'd be great, but it's not realistic.